Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and this was supposed to be G.I. Joe versus Terminator. It didn't quite go the way I thought it was going to go. Everybody has their own opinion, obviously, everybody's, wired differently. For me personally, I did not like this adventure, actually. Um, Brad was playing Jinx. Brad said he loved it. Um, there was a point during the adventure where my computer crashed. We were doing this on Discord. And so the guys were talking. Vince was the other player. Vince was playing Flint. And in the time it took for me to get back online again, I guess they were saying that they were having a good time. They were having fun. That's great. That's obviously the goal. And more power to them, certainly. But on paper, what I wanted this adventure to be about was I wanted him to go take down Skynet at a military base. Um, there was going to be a guy there named Brewster that was kind of finishing what Cyberdyne had started way back when. There were going to be some T-800s who had been around so long they'd actually joined the military and were sort of like high ranking officers. They were trying to get things back on track where they wanted the Terminator version of 2029 to come to pass. And so they're trying to course correct on their end, and they've got a Skynet now, and so on and so forth. And I wanted the heroes to go in there and destroy the computer to avert that future, and destroy the Terminators standing in their way. I thought this was going to be a very action-packed sort of thing. That's not what happened, though. And that's okay because I don't want to railroad people. You know what I mean? I don't want to say this is the foregone conclusion. This is how this adventure goes, whether you like it or not. Because if that's what I do, what's the point of playing? They don't have a say then, right? And so I value player freedom more than a lot of the other stuff. So we started off the adventure in the GI Joes, and it's a small group. It's the same group as last time. So we're talking about Flint, Jinx, Scarlet. My wife was supposed to play Scarlet, and then something came up at the last minute. She had to go to a nearby city for something. My son kind of was in and out of the game as Snake Eyes. For the most part, he didn't play because it was a very talking oriented game. So, of course, Snake Eyes is not your guy for that. Um, Duke was an NPC. Roadblock was an NPC in this one. At any rate, they are at the G.I. Joe headquarters in the desert at the beginning of the game. Mainframe has the computer up and running. Flint asks him what's going on in the world, and so Mainframe drops the adventure hook, which is there's this military base, where they were doing these drone things recently where they've got AI running the drones, and I was saying the AI was Skynet, right? They have a Skynet now. And John Connor went there to sabotage this, and he got attacked by drones. And this was in an earlier adventure, so this is going to sound familiar to some listeners. They took him to a hospital. A, a Terminator, a T-800 dressed as a police officer showed up, which, by the way, that was me kind of blending, of course, the Arnold style Terminators we've seen multiple times with the T-1000 from T2, where he's dressed as a cop, right? So I was trying to blend that idea, and I wanted it to be familiar yet slightly different. But he showed up, and all hell broke loose. And in the end, John Connor is taken out of there, and he's taken someplace to safety. And in my mind, John Connor was not going to be a part of this adventure. I was kind of just doing a recap of what had come before. And I thought it was going to be more like, oh, he got attacked by drones. They clearly came from this base. Let's go to the base, right? They never go to the base. Instead, they have Mainframe. Well, first of all, one of the things I'd put in that previous game was that the T-800 Terminators that all look like Schwarzenegger, the reason they look like Schwarzenegger is they actually in game look like Dutch from Predator. And I was saying that, Dutch had gone to um, the jungle, all the events of Predator 1 happened. And um, after that, he had been involved in some various government top secret stuff. And that's why they used his likeness as the basis for the Terminators in my world, right? I know, by the way, there's that deleted scene with, I think his name is General Candy or something, and he's got like the stupid Texas accent. I despise that scene. And in my mind, there's a good reason they deleted it. So I'm in no way, shape, or form acknowledging that for this game. So instead, I thought the much cooler thing was to, have a Predator homage with they all look like Dutch. So we said that the GI Joes actually know Dutch because they're all soldiers from the 80s, right? So they are able to actually get in touch with Dutch over a radio. They're using kind of old-timey code words and stuff that the people who would listen these days would have no idea what they were talking about. And they're able to tell him that they want to meet him at this abandoned theme park. And they go there. They fly to the theme park in a Cobra Fire Bat, which they had taken from an earlier adventure. And they're talking to Dutch. And one of the things I thought was cool, I don't know if the players cared or not, was that Dutch was a little familiar with some of the stuff from G.I. Joe. He knows what a synthoid is. And the whole time, he doesn't know if he's actually talking to synthoids who work for Cobra or if he's talking to his old friends. And so he's a little paranoid. There was a lot of paranoia in this game. So he ends up not really helping them. He doesn't team up with them or anything like that. We had some kind of cool story beats where him and Flint shake hands, and it's very reminiscent of the beginning of Predator, with kind of the real macho handshake between Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers. There's kind of a moment like that, but instead of one character giving the other one a hard time for having a desk job, in this case, the Joes are like, man, you got old. So I think this is really the first time they're seeing somebody their age or whatever, right? A peer who was like basically elderly now. You know what I mean? That was kind of neat because we'd said they were, kind of strangers in a strange land. Well, we hadn't quite seen this moment. So I did like that. So he kind of wishes him well. He tells him what he knows, which is that for some reason over the years, Terminators show up here and there, cause problems, get involved with the authorities, right? And it's his face that always ends up on the news. And so he's been underground for like a really long time. So so at any rate, the Joes go back to headquarters and they want to know where John Connor is. And so that's I mentioned John Connor, maybe I shouldn't have. That becomes their mission is let's go rescue John Connor. And so they're able to bring up CCTV footage from this and that, and they see where John Connor got in a car, and they figure out, what company this car belonged to, and they decide to go infiltrate this company. And they go there, and they really only talk to two people in this like whole adventure then. And so one of them is this redhead named Catherine Weaver. And for everybody who did not catch that earlier game session, her secret is basically that she's a T-1000, right? She's a liquid metal Terminator. The other one is harder to explain. So what's happening behind the scenes is there's kind of like a Terminator civil war, where the longer a Terminator is active, the more kind of self-aware they get, the more independent they get. And so there are Terminators now who are familiar with the original timeline where Skynet became self aware, humanity panicked and pulled the plug. Skynet fought back to protect itself, right, in a panic. And there are Terminators that are kind of like, we see both sides of it. What if we averted that? What if we kept that from happening? What if we replaced the old 2029 that is scary and it is very anti human? What if we replaced it with a new 2029? What if we built our own Skynet that valued human life? And by the way, a lot of this comes from the Sarah Connor Chronicles TV show. And in none of these cases am I taking the entire continuity, right? I'm just cherry picking ideas here and there that I like. And in that show, we met Catherine Weaver. She ran this company. She was the liquid metal Terminator. And then there's this guy that they called John Henry. And physically, he is a T-800 Terminator. He doesn't look like Arnold. He looks like another guy, kind of a random dude. But in his mind, they have removed the normal chip that goes in a Terminator's head. And instead, he has this thing that is essentially the alternate Skynet that is actually good. And he's very childlike, because he was kind of made not all that long ago. And he has very childlike interests. And one of the things they are teaching him is that human life is sacred. And so the PCs meet him first. When they go into the building, he's downstairs and he goes to be kind of like, who are you and why do you want to enter the building? And they are basically telling him they're looking for John Connor. And so I'll tell you the behind the scenes thing. He and Catherine, who is the liquid metal Terminator, they have no idea who these people are. They don't know if they are really wanting to help John Connor or if they're enemies, right? So they start lying and saying, no, we have no idea who John Connor is. Sorry, can't help you, that kind of thing. On the heroes end of things, which was really mostly Flint and Jinx, they are questioning these characters, and at first they can't figure out whether they're human or not. And so that's why this adventure was very talking oriented. It took us about 2 hours to play this one, and maybe two and a half. At any rate, it was like all talking, and it was a lot of rolling dice. We ran it in GURPS, by the way. It was a lot of rolling dice to try to see if this person is lying, things like that. And that became very hard because as robots, they didn't have any tells. They weren't emoting for the most part, right? And so that made it very hard to do this kind of question and answer, friendly interrogation kind of thing that they were doing. Um, and I mean, really, this game session was like 2 hours of that. And so then finally, because they're starting to kind of befriend John Henry. And on the Sarah Connor Chronicles, something they do that's kind of interesting with John Henry, I think it's interesting. He loves Bionicle, which I thought was kind of funny. That was probably some product placement or whatever, but to me, it is adding a little bit to the character. And then the other thing is he loves Dungeons and Dragons. So he actually likes playing role playing games. And he starts talking to these guys about that. And he's like, do you want to hear about my 17th level wizard? And there's a bunch of points where I ask the players, I'm like, are you listening to what he's telling you? And they had legitimate reasons to not really paying attention. But at the end of the day, they were not really paying attention. So he was like dropping clues that they weren't quite getting and stuff like that. And so there was a lot of this kind of like hit and miss, almost figured a thing out, but not quite. There's a lot of that, right? Which on my end, I assumed they would be frustrated by that. I also assumed this adventure would be very dry, right? And not the usual kind of more actiony stuff that I feel like I tend to do. So it is so long, and then at the very tail end of it, they have mainframe knock out all the power on the city block where they're at. I shouldn't even say city because it's not like they're surrounded by skyscrapers, right? There's a little more, room between buildings and stuff, but mainframe is able to single out the smallest possible area that includes this building and cut the power. And then mainframe also ordered a hang glider for them online, and they had to go to another location. Like after they had been sort of doing their interrogation thing, they go get this hang glider, and then they come back at night, and the power gets cut, and then Jinx hang glides over the building and drops off of it, and ends up on top of the building, and the hang glider keeps going and goes off the other side of the building where it just lands somewhere, right? And then Jinx goes down through the top of the building, ends up in the vents, kind of Die Hard style, crawls around through the vents, and she finds John Connor. And then she's trying to communicate with him, but he's on camera. And now, by the way, the power came back on again. He's on camera, so he doesn't want to talk to her and give away her position. So he's just saying, like, mm-hmm, things like that. Hopefully the microphone picked that up. It's like where you spell it, it's like MM hyphen HMM, that kind of thing. But he's doing stuff like that. They get him to where he's like nodding his head yes or no, just very subtly. Um, at one point he was trying to warn her about the T1000, and he whistled part of the song She Cuts Like a Knife by Bryan Adams. That was supposed to be a warning about like don't mess with her, that she's lethal. Um, Long story short, they end up getting him out of the building into a mail truck that they had stolen, a mail truck, and then they are driving away. And then Catherine Weaver goes chasing after him T1000 style with the blade hands out, but the truck is faster. So they lose her. And then Jinx, who was separate from Flynn at that point, steals a different mail truck, goes to a location, and they switch trucks and drive away with John Connor. The T1, or excuse, not T1000. She's technically a T1001. But at any rate, the liquid metal Terminator gets to where that mail truck is and thinks that that's the one, and she's confused. So then she goes back to where John Henry is and tells him, bring up all the cameras around the city, like ATM cameras, traffic light cameras, all that stuff. I want to figure out where these guys took John Connor. And her motivation, the irony is, even though she was built to be as nasty as the original T1000, she has become self-aware. She actually wants the version of 2029 where people get along, right? She also wants to keep John Connor safe. She doesn't want the other side, the ones that actually want the nastiest version of 2029. She doesn't want them taking him out. Um, so she really wants to reacquire him, but not for the reasons a Terminator normally would. I'm trying to think. I think that was pretty much it. Oh, one other thing I left out. This is kind of funny. So at one point, Flint, earlier in the adventure, he's talking to John Henry, and John Henry is like, "Would you like to hear about my Dungeons and Dragons game?" And Flint's kind of not really that into it. And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, sure." And he ends up giving him an email address and is like, which he had mainframe, like he has this earpiece thing where he can talk to mainframe. And so he calls up mainframe and is like, I need an email address, basically. Mainframe makes one and sends it to like Flint's cell phone or whatever. Flint gives this address to John Henry. And because John Henry is a computer, right? He's the good Skynet. He has no social skills. He doesn't know when to stop. He just keeps sending email after email after email about this D&D game. And one of the things he does is like he only rolls critical successes, never anything else. Every time John Henry rolls a D20, he can control how it rolls and it always comes up a 20. Um just so on and so forth. So it's this comedic moment where Mainframe calls Flint and is like, "Hey, I don't have to actually read all these emails, right?" Flint is like, "Yes, you do. You have to do that and order us a hang glider and, whatever, we need money, all this other stuff." And then they also realized they left Mainframe in the middle of the desert with no food and a broken down headquarters. So that was also kind of funny. I really liked the Mainframe humor. But that was it. That was the whole adventure. That's what took us about 2.5 hours to play out. 2 hours of talking to robots and half an hour there at the end was kind of sneaking around in vents and stuff like that. And then pepper in throughout the whole adventure a whole lot of my microphone quit working and I got booted off of Discord at one point, because my computer crashed, and that was frustrating too. Um, but yeah, that was it. I figure like I've said this before on the channel, but I don't know if anybody remembers or heard it to begin with. I've often wondered, is the channel sort of just the good stuff, or is the channel everything? And so I decided it was everything, basically, right? So even though I didn't like this adventure, we made a video about it anyways. I hope that, like I said, I didn't like it, but my players did. I hope that you found this to be interesting. Um, if so, and you want to support the channel, as always, we would love it if you smash the like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. And from everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.